While the title of this video may seem a bit extreme, I'm just trying to use it to illustrate a point, which is not necessarily that we all need to move back to living like we're in the 1800s or whatever, or avoid all technology completely, but that it might be beneficial to slow down the pace of life for some of us. Not everyone's built the same way, and some people aren't built for instance, social media. Ironic that I'm using social media to present this point, but there's a lot of valid resources indicating that alternate pacing can be beneficial for people. With anything, there's positives and negatives of any kind of choice how you want to live. We can talk about the original Luddites, for instance, and these were 19th century textile workers that smashed up a bunch of machineries because they were tired of being replaced and having their livelihoods and their way of living threatened by technology. That's an obvious example we can relate to today when we talk about AI, But even if you look at any of the jobs, not that long, but what's the role of photographers now compared to, well, let's just say 20 years ago? What's the role of photographers now compared to 20 years ago? And certainly with the advent of AI, what's the role of photographers? Where are the film developers outside of niche markets with like the whole photography revival stuff? Or people producing vinyl records, or any of the industries that used to exist? With technology, those jobs were reduced and then shed, and those jobs no longer exist, and people filled new occupational niches, and new things were created because of the new technology. And it's a process, the process of technological progress, and it's a good thing. But it's also a good thing for some people to remove themselves from the process, or to take a more nuanced look at the adoption of the technologies that create this progress. For example, the Amish is probably the best example that we can use for this scenario, but there are others, but they're the best example because they're economically successful, they're demographically successful, and they have no higher incidences of mental illness or disability outside of some inbreeding problems, which will happen anytime you have a small closed-off community that doesn't have inflow of genetics. But generally, they live happy, healthy lives and are economically competitive. There are Amish that use the internet in a limited sense in order to sell products. There's Amish people that use telephones and Amish people that do not use telephones. There's Amish people that use each community makes its own rules and decides what technologies it will and won't adopt, and how it will or won't adopt those things. For instance, the one that I was reading about that uses computers and the internet, they have special computers built for them that basically just make it possible to do business. You can't go on YouTube or do any of that stuff. You can buy, sell, and ship stuff online. Bare minimum. They don't use it to educate. They have their own standard traditional classrooms for that. Now, the reason I say I think it's time for a new Amish movement, and the reason I use that wording, is because there's not much of a secular community that follows the same Amish tradition. I think that the Amish tradition is also rooted in a very specific, unique and specific culture and identity, and there are more people, especially nowadays, there are more people who want to live in communities that are very selective about technological use and adoption. But with our modern society, we also have a society that is not necessarily overtly religious. And I also think it would be a benefit to have a community that didn't have one particular religion or another. You could have, for instance, Catholics, Muslims, Jewish people, Mormons, Shinto, Buddhist, whatever, all kinds of people living in the same community. And the thing that they have in common is that they get together and they discuss a new technology thoroughly and debate it and decide how and when it will be adopted and in what way it's going to be used in their community, instead of just put it to the market and let the market decide. I think that putting it to the market and letting the market decide is a very important thing on a national scale. But I think for individual subcultures, I think it would be beneficial to create a community that waits and sees what the rest are doing first, so you can avoid the pitfalls. I mean, I think it would be nice to, for instance, for kids to have access to the internet for learning and stuff like that, but there are major flaws in Wikipedia. It's fairly unbiased, but there are many articles that are clearly biased, and it's community based, so it's a great resource, it's a great technology, a great thing to have. I think what would be good is to have a Wikipedia-like system, but it was run by an educational institution, or at least highly educated people. And social media, I think you could probably get rid of basically everything, and it would be beneficial for children to have access to the internet. Because what is the internet? It's the free flow of information, right? But some information is bad. If I tell you to drink the Kool-Aid and jump off the cliff, and I convince you that's the right thing to do and that the aliens are going to take you up and into your spaceship if you do it at the right time, because the aliens have sent a message to me saying that on this day the aliens will come down and race us all, but we must jump into the air and their tractor beams will pull us into their ships. If I convince 1,000 people to do that, well, maybe that information shouldn't have been shared, because I just killed 1,000 people over an insane belief. Some information is bad. How you decide that and who decides that is highly based on your personal perspective. It's like those words when we use the words good and bad. It's entirely an opinion-based idea. Good, bad, better, best, worse, or worst. That's up to your personal opinion. However, and when I talk about this, I'm really specifically talking about it in the United States, but because we live in a country of nearly 400 million, if not, I don't know, I haven't looked at the most recent census statistics, but nearly 400 million people, there's no way everyone is going to agree on what's good or bad. But in order to live in a happy society, an ideal situation is where most people agree about what's good or bad. You can do that within the context of a larger society by creating a subculture. I think creating a new Amish movement that supports at least the defense forces, like the Coast Guard and the National Guard, and is based around the concept of adopting technology in a way that produces the most happiness for the most amount of people within this smaller group, means that these small communities will be able to decide for themselves what is best. And so the greatest amount of people within these communities will be able to be happy from the way things are adopted. And the more these communities that are created, and the more that exist, the more that people will be able to move between communities and choose a community that best aligns with their needs and desires and wants. And when you take that to a national scale, now you have a nation of community, all who find maximal happiness within their small community, and all who come together on a national scale to defend this patchwork of ideals. And that's why I think we need a new Amish movement.